Welcome in to a Wednesday edition of Set the Screen. I'm your host, Justin Phan, joined as usual by Byron Keech and John Raudebaugh. We have a special public show edition of the episode today. I think we're going to start out, for those who are new, give you kind of a brief overview of our product and what we offer. We'll bring that up right now. And yeah, I think obviously the meat and potatoes of what we do offer are our projections. And, as you see from the results so far, we've been doing pretty well. I would say when we kind of started out, we were kind of, making adjustments on the fly. This is our first year doing this, but we've definitely kind of found a good little rhythm here over the last, month or two. 7.2% ROI at 30 minutes before tip. Obviously this stuff all accounts for news, all the latest information, minutes limits, all that. So, the results have been pretty good so far, and, our members seem to be pretty happy with what we're doing. And then kind of the next thing I want to highlight beyond our projections is our news. So, John, if you want to bring up the news alerts channel on Discord, I think this is, one of our kind of secret weapons, and, it's obviously a private Discord channel just for our members. We don't have a public Twitter account. I've been there, done that. I think this method is a lot more kind of efficient for our users. We're focusing on just the impactful news that you need on a given slate. So no alerts for next day's players on 8th, 9th man in the rotation. We will hyper focus on today's slate and give you everything you need. I guarantee you this is the fastest news source you can get on NBA news and injuries, generally 30 seconds to a minute ahead of our competition. And like I said, we really are focused on highlighting the most impactful information on a given slate and cutting out kind of the fodder and the stuff that doesn't really matter, so that every time you get that Discord alert, that it's something that you can act upon. Also in our Discord, you'll see our NBA Alpha channel. That's a spot that myself, John, and SBK are there all day, just talking through any sort of edges, information, things we like, things we don't like on the slate, just interacting with all our members. It ranges from kind of serious conversation, high level conversation, to kind of shooting the shit and sweating bets later in on the day. SBK writes these great projection notes for our members every day, where he kind of goes through team by team, gives you just kind of a overview of what you should be looking for, how you should be approaching each team, news, injuries, rotation considerations that are hanging on. So, a lot more context for you guys when using these projections. And the last thing is the NBA projection updates channel. That will keep you up to date with every single projection update that's notable that we make. So you'll see that, okay, this team got updated for this news. Another team got updated because the lineup got changed from what we expected. One thing we do in the news alerts channel too is to highlight the lineup changes. So we're not just tweeting out just lineups blind. We'll tweet out, this team is starting this lineup as expected, or, this team is starting, this player instead of this player, update coming. And then we'll send the update in the projection updates channel when those projections are coming. One thing we want to notice too is that, for our members, we're not going to show the screen just yet, but we do have a Props 2.0 product coming out where, the UI, the user experience will be a lot better, a lot less, slowness, crashing, etc. So that should be coming in the near future. We're excited about that. Continue to improve the user experience for all of you. So yeah, we'll get into kind of our normal show cadence now. And let's get into the news, because we do have a lot of impactful news on this slate. 8 conditionals so far. We'll get into those. Let's start in Boston. This is probably the biggest spot of the slate. Jaylen Brown, Kristaps Porzingis, Sam Hauser, all questionable. Al Horford, Drew Holiday are in. Luke Cornett is still out. So we saw last night Jaylen Brown suffered that injury early in the third quarter, took a knee to his thigh. He spent a lot of time stretching it out, flexing it to get loose, entered the game again and to start the fourth quarter. And then Mazzulla said after he pulled him for the last few minutes of that game, I think at the 3-minute mark, because he was hobbling. So looking at Jaylen, would be pretty surprised if Jaylen plays today. This is the second leg of a back-to-back. We've seen Boston often exercise caution in these spots, and Jaylen himself called it a bone bruise after last night's game, which is concerning. So just given how hobbled he looked yesterday, the Celtics track record of playing it cautious, this being a second leg of a back-to-back, would think Jaylen Brown likely sits out tonight. Kristaps Porzingis, questionable. So really late scratch yesterday. Basically, after game locked, we got Torrey Craig starting, and then soon after, Kristaps Porzingis doubtful due to an illness. So afterwards, Joe Mazzulla said they held KP out yesterday to make sure he's ready to play today. So that Q tag, we sent available last night based on those comments, but that Q tag feels a little bit more like a P tag today. We think Kristaps has the best shot of all these three questionable players to go. And just given our projection on him, we're pretty conservative with his minutes. In case he's still kind of feeling the impact of that illness, we're at a relatively conservative 30.5 for him. We've seen in competitive games him get up to 33, a little bit beyond that, but we're at 30.5. We feel pretty good about that, accounting for a little bit of potential limitations with that illness. Sam Hauser, the last questionable here, played 40 minutes last night. And him popping up here with a back injury is definitely concerning. He's been plagued by back issues all season, missed some time with back issues back in December. He was kind of limited just with minutes, I think, in January, just because he looked like kind of a shell of himself, especially defensively, because of those back issues. So Sam Hauser, 40 minutes last night, second leg of a back-to-back, recurring back issues makes me think he is highly questionable to play tonight. So looking at these Q tags right now with Jaylen, Porzingis, and Sam Hauser, we think the most likely outcome will be Kristaps Porzingis plays, and then Jaylen Brown and Sam Hauser both sit. So the Celtics in that situation, they would start Jrue Holiday, Derek White, Jason Tatum, Al Horford, and Porzingis. Bench unit would be Peyton Pritchard, Torrey Craig, Neemias Queta, Shireman, Walsh, Davison, and then you can get into Tillman if you want to. I think this spot particularly, just given how they project to play this out, Jaylen Brown had joked previously that the Celtics usually play through players like Peyton Pritchard against teams like the Pistons. They let Pritch go for 30 and still win the game. That was his quote. That may actually happen here, because they might be really shorthanded without Jaylen Brown, without Sam Hauser, to where Pritchard might have to play, 30 to 32 minutes off the bench. You look at this Pistons defense, they're very stingy around the rim. So the way you want to attack it generally is with perimeter players. So for me, the two that stick out are Derek White and Peyton Pritchard, the two that on the Boston side you want to attack through. Jason Tatum, especially if Jaylen Brown's out, he'll still get there through volume, but he definitely does draw a tough one-on-one matchup with the Sar Thompson. So for me, kind of looking at the totality of Boston, Derek White, Pritchard are the two I want kind of exposure to, and I think would benefit the most if things play out the way we think they will. SBK, any thoughts on Boston here?
I think you nailed it. I mean, I very much agree with the injury breakdown. Like, I think Jaylen's probably out. I think Hauser also, like the back issue that you mentioned, has played time for a while. I think likely keeps him out. Their bench is thin. I mean, Pritchard, regardless of the game, like how this game goes, whether it's competitive or not, he does have 30-minute upside for sure. Would not be shocked to see him exceed that, especially if they're short. They have everybody. They have like the J.D. Davisons, the Anton Watsons available. None of those guys are out. So, if the game does get out of hand, they have more bodies to go, deeper into the rotation. Like Drew Peterson is a guy who, at times when they've been short the front court, has seen some run. Curious to see if Torrey Craig kind of holds onto a role there. He started last night, but Pritchard ended up starting the second half. So things didn't really go great for him there. We have to think, they're without Jalen and Hauser, likely that he'd pretty much have to be in there to some degree. And then, you have like the Shireman Walsh kind of group, maybe they see some light sort of rotation run. But yeah, you can certainly count on, I think, a lot of minutes from Pritchard. And I like the just the offensive upside for him, just scoring in general and kind of from 3-point range.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a low key important game for Boston, so you're not surprised like those comments from Missoula that they were holding KP out to play today. The Pistons are creeping up in the standings. Cleveland's kind of running away with the first seed. And Pistons are good, man. Like they're fourth and fifth Pistons Celtics over the last 10 games in offensive rating. So I would think Jaylen Brown would try to give it a go if he could, but market right now is telling us that someone's sitting out, and it's probably him.
Yeah, to close this out, I want to kind of look at the back end of this rotation, assuming that Jalen and Hauser can't go. I think the two that are locked in, obviously Peyton Pritchard by far, he's in that 30, 32-minute range if those two sit. Queta is that next guy up for me, even though Torrey Craig got the spot start for KP last night. Queta is a guy who's played, 18 to 22 minutes in these spots before. I think we could see some overlap potentially between KP and Queta, or Horford and Queta go double big. They're very comfortable with that look. Like we said, Cornette is still out, so thins them out a little bit in that front court. And then after Pritchard and Queta, it becomes a jumble of guys that I don't think anybody really stands out. Obviously, like I said, Torrey Craig got the spot start, but only played 14 minutes last night. Didn't start the second half. Then you had like Shireman, Jordan Wallace, Davison, Tillman, Drew Peterson. So all those guys might project to be in that like 6 to 16-minute range, depending on how things play out. So I think it's pretty condensed today, that they want to play like 7 guys for sure, and then Torrey Craig, Shireman, Walsh, Davidson, etc. will kind of fill in beyond that, maybe be 8, 9, and 10, 8 or 9. So let's move on to Toronto here, the team that they did play last night. They are 2 on a second leg of a back-to-back. Scotty Barnes got added to the injury report as questionable. So is Jakob Poeltl. Emmanuel Quickley will play in the second leg of a back-to-back, not on the injury report. So we'll start with Scotty Barnes, because Scotty Barnes went down and was holding his right side for a bit early in last night's game, but played through it the rest of the game. We don't have any more intel on Scotty Barnes at the moment, but same-day ad is a little concerning. I think he's probably going to be a true 50-50 game-time decision. With Jakob Poeltl, Darko, their coach, said yesterday that Poeltl was very close to returning. So I think he has a good shot of being back here. Would expect relatively limited minutes for him, considering how much time he's missed. They do have options behind him that they've been leaning on while he's been sidelined in Mogbo, in Orlando Robinson, and Chris Boucher. So we'll also note that Garrett Temple, Jamison Battle, AJ Lawson, Roden are out today too. Combination of like injury, personal G League. Jamison Battle did play earlier today for the 905 team, but he left early and didn't return due to a nose injury. So just want to note that they don't have like an abundance of depth if Barnes and or Poeltl are ruled out. So we are thinking that Poeltl has a good chance of returning, just based on Darko's comments last night that he was very close. Let's talk about Scotty Barnes. So Scotty Barnes, you look at when he's been off the court, IQ and Grady Dick have seen significant usage bumps this season. For me in this spot against Indiana, both these teams, Indiana, Toronto, really poor rim defenses. And you want to attack these teams inside. And the guy that fits that bill the most, if Scotty's out, is RJ Barrett. So I think like 30% of his shots are at the rim or somewhere around that, definitely more than IQ or Grady Dick. So RJ, I think, would be in a pretty favorable spot here if Scotty is unable to go. We'll note that Chris Boucher has been on an absurd run. He scored 31 points in 34 minutes over his last 2 games. Crazy hot. And I think he's, especially if Scotty's out, they would need a little bit more of him at the 4. So I think he's a guy that could be kind of sneaky a little bit if Scotty is unable to go. SBK, any thoughts on Toronto here tonight with Scotty and York, both questionable?
Yeah, I mean, Boucher has been a lightning rod. We have him at 19 and a half minutes in the conditional with just Scotty out. I do agree that it's probably likely that we see Pirtle. I think, gun to my head, that's kind of the direction I'd lean. There was out last time on the back-to-back. Does seem like he's a good shot. If he doesn't return, it is like I think there's some chance that John Mogbo does not get the start again. I think they kind of had went in that direction last night for to kind of match up with Boston a little bit. I could see Orlando Robinson getting back in there. Not terribly convicted in that one way or the other. But yeah, if they don't have Barnes, would assume that Agbaji gets that start on the wing. Kind of pushes RJ up to the 4 a little bit. Jacoby Walter, probably a guy that plays a little bit more. We have him 22 minutes in that Barnes out conditional. Could see a little bit of overlap between Jamal Shed and Emmanuel Quickly. Shed generally kind of just eating those IQ minutes, whatever he leaves behind. I think he's at least got some path to play, a few more beyond that. So just, they're obviously, a big chunk of their offense. They're rebounding, distributing. It's kind of absent when they lose a guy like Scotty. At least RJ can kind of, replicate some of that. I do agree that he is in the best spot. Would not be surprised to see a pretty high minute total on him either if they can stay competitive.
Yeah, a couple notes here. First of all, I'm proud of you for nailing the Shed pronunciation.
Finally.
Kudos to you. You finally got over that hump. And then we'll note that the Mogbo over Orlando Robinson decision that you mentioned against Boston yesterday, I think it makes sense to stick with Mogbo if York ends up sitting again, just because, Miles Turner is definitely stretchy and they would need that mobility to kind of guard him on the perimeter that Mogbo provides over Orlando Robinson, kind of a little bit of the same, thinking that went into that decision last night for him to start against Boston. So let's move on to Indiana, the other team here. So Tyrese Halliburton and TJ McConnell, both questionable here. So yeah, let's start with Tyrese Halliburton. So he's generally played through Q tags this season, but he's missed one game this season. The only game he missed this season was due to the same groin issue. He had a left groin strain in January that sidelined for him for a game. Today, it's left groin soreness. So I want to know, it's very important that he has a track record here of missing time with this same groin issue. I think it's like true 50-50 that he goes. Someone in the chat was asking about him earlier, just with that history of him having missed time with this. I think there's a decent chance that he ends up missing, which is very problematic for the Pacers because their offense has cratered this season when Halliburton's been off the court. Offensive rating of 116 when he's on the court, 107 when he's off the court. And you have TJ McConnell questionable as well. That could mean if they're down both, they would not have a true point guard to run that offense. So let's talk in the situation that Halliburton ends up missing. So Carlisle has preferred to keep TJ McConnell in that second unit. He has shown a strong preference too for not wanting to extend TJ McConnell's minutes beyond mid to low 20s. So we have him at 22-23 in that Halliburton out conditional. We'll mention that also for new members here, as part of our projections, we do conditional projections as well. So we have 8 players that are notable questionables today. For those teams, for those situations, you'll find projections for that player in and for that player out. So you'll be able to toggle between Pacers projections with Halliburton in and Pacers projections with Halliburton out. Same with, Jaylen Brown, Porzingis, Scotty Barnes, Pirtle, all these other guys that we're talking about. So yeah, like I said, in that conditional with Halliburton out, we don't have McConnell's minutes too crazy. And we've seen that in the past. What we'll see if Halliburton's out is Nembhard would start at point guard, and then we'll see either Ben Mathurin or Ben Shepherd slide into the starting lineup alongside Aaron Nesmith, who's been in there the last couple games. So we mentioned liking attacking centers against both these teams, Toronto and Indy. So Miles Turner would be in a good spot even if Pirtle returns. But I think Turner is a guy who would be hurt clearly if Halliburton is out. That's a guy that runs the offense, orchestrates things, runs that pick and pop, finds him on the perimeter, keeps that offense going. Turner is a guy who isn't going to generate a lot of his own offense. So good spot for Turner, though he would get hurt if McConnell or Halliburton is unable to go. The guy I want to focus on here, I think benefits the most if Halliburton ends up sitting, is Ben Mathurin. So we talked about him possibly sliding into the starting lineup, here, if Halliburton is out. And you look at the on-off stuff this season for Halliburton, Ben Mathurin has been the biggest beneficiary this season from production and a usage standpoint when Halliburton's off the court. Makes sense, right? I think they'll need a guy that is going to have to generate a lot of the offense, that is comfortable handling the ball, and Mathurin checks a lot of those boxes for them today. So I want to kick it. We talked about the conditional projection. I want to kick it to John first. We're going to bring up our conditional projections here and toggle Halliburton out, right, John? Or in?
Well, we can start with Halliburton, and I think the angle here, while we do show a nice projection on Mathurin, I like the angle here with Nembhard. In that one game Halliburton missed, Nembhard racked up 9 assists. Connell was in there too, but not even just that one game. Last season, Nembhard averaged 6.5 assists per game without Halliburton. So I think there's like a pretty nice angle here. We could show the projections for Nembhard. So this is with Halliburton toggled in. We can sim the projection, and so this tells me, the market might be leaning out on Halliburton. So with the conditional projections, as you can see, there's a big undershowing on his assist line. We toggle Halliburton out. His assist projection improves pretty significantly, and it's enough of an edge. I think that even with McConnell questionable too, I think you got some equity here with that for the projection to improve even more. So get a pretty high ceiling. This is something that we would have. You'd want to have your kind of finger on the trigger when that news comes in. It's the Discord alert that you could fire on.
Yeah, I mean, if they don't have TJ either, they have really nothing in terms of the typical distributing they usually have. Quentin Jackson is questionable, so I'd be curious to see if they'd have him to provide any depth. But Nembhard would be on ball a ton, certainly a ton more than usual. We'd probably see Pascal Siakam take on some sort of a, more of a distributing role just to kind of help fill the void there. But the, vast majority of that would be on Nembhard's shoulders.
Yeah, I mean, you think Furphy would get involved as well? A guy that has gotten in there and provided a couple of minutes of depth, but yeah, it would get pretty thin, and they would definitely have to lean pretty heavily on Nembhard and Mathurin in that situation to generate their offense. So let's move on to our next team. We'll look at the Knicks. Karl-Anthony Towns questionable, OG Anunoby probable. So yeah, we all saw that Cat injury, suffered that knee injury during Sunday's loss. Visibly limping, was laid out on the bench, clutching that knee in pain. For some reason, Tibbs decided to put him back in down 20 with less than 4 minutes to go. Not that he's, in the first year of a 4-year, $220 million extension or anything, but just given how that looked and given that Cat has missed time already this season, I think you would hope that someone would talk some sense into Tibbs and the team would be cautious here and hold him out if he's not 100%. We lean Cat out slightly, just given how it looked. Tibbs said he was okay afterwards, but clearly was laboring out there. So I don't think it's like a huge surprise what they would do. We've seen the Knicks already this season without Cat. We'd get a heavy dose of Precious Achiuwa at center. We have him at 31 minutes at center. Alone in that conditional with Errol Huck-Porty playing the rest of the 17, and then Precious getting some run at power forward as well. And then, I kind of want to toss it to you, SBK, on the Knicks here since they're playing Philly. Philly has been a disaster overall, but obviously really bad defensively too, without Joel Embiid. They don't have Yabu today either. So it'll be pretty bad for them overall. Where do we want to kind of attack this Philly defense today if Cat is unable to go?
I mean, they're going to be able to get what they want pretty much. Like, I feel, I mean, Andre Drummond expect he'll be like the gift for that security guard, like just like not like really doing anything. Like Andre Drummond, the effort from him has been like zero. Not expecting that to continue really. But yeah, there's like, so at least recently we've seen some games where the Knicks have missed, Josh Hart or OG Anunoby. There's not like a massive change really in the offense when that happens. When somebody like Cat sits out, it really changes the entire kind of landscape. Jalen Brunson, obviously like a humongous usage monster as it is, that becomes even he is just going to be everything for them. The Sixers have had a ton of issues in the past stopping Brunson. Nick Nurse has in the past thrown a lot of attention at him. I would expect, especially if they don't have Cat, that Brunson is seeing very consistent double teams. He's not, I don't think, going to have an easy time, but it is the Sixers, so I imagine he'll be able to still do his thing. But if they do throw, you'd have to imagine so ton is going to be on Brunson's shoulders, period. If they do throw a lot at him and kind of leave some other guys open to make them beat them, I think Mikal Bridges should be somebody who should benefit there. Maybe Josh Hart. Josh Hart has killed the Sixers in playoffs in the past. Precious doesn't really have that much of an offensive game, but given the lack of just like any kind of rim defense or resistance there at all, I'd imagine that he finds his way into a decent offensive night if he's able to play, Tibbs 34, 35, 36 minutes, something like that. Then OG, I think he'd get a bump. But, Brunson would be the clearest winner by far. It just kind of depends. Like, I think his output just depends on how much of an effort Nick Nurse makes to kind of slow him down.
One last team I want to get into, then I can toss it to you, John, on this, because this is Miami oriented. Bam Adebayo questionable, Andrew Wiggins, Khalil Ware probable, and Kevin Love available. So yeah, Bam Adebayo questionable. We don't have a strong read, any information so far, so we're treating it as 50-50. He said after shoot around today that he didn't know if he was going to play, which is kind of generally a little concerning because guys are generally optimistic when they're asked if they're going to be able to go. So I think Bam has a decent shot of sitting here, which, his absence changes a lot of things. I think Okongwu on the other end, his outlook improves drastically, going from, Bam to Khalil Ware and Kevin Love and Haywood, all these other guys they're kind of fill in, Kyle Anderson. But I want to start with Miami first. What they look like. Obviously, Khalil Ware would see the majority of the minutes there at center. They would, abandon that double big look that they've been going with. Obviously, this offense should look horrific though. I think they scored like 86 points the last time they played the Hawks recently. That might be a repeat. Again, if they don't have Bam, would be a lot on Tyler Hero's shoulders, and they don't really have a lot else. So, quick thoughts on Miami, John, if Adebayo has to end up sitting.
Yeah, not great, right? I was going to say with the Knicks, it's kind of getting to the danger zone. They got to start winning some games. Miami, they've been in the danger zone. I mean, they're like, our hopes are just for the annual Chicago meetup in the play-in. Without Bam, it's going to fall a lot on Hero. Just the offense hasn't been there, man. And obviously Terry Rozier should be out of the rotation at some point if he's not already, but he'll have to play here if Bam's out, just for another body. Lacking serious front court depth without Nikola Jovic, who broke his hand. Last game, this is a rematch from the other night against the Hawks, this time in Miami. 15 total assists for Miami in that game. It's kind of dreadful. Saw Slow-Mo get in there. He'll play a ton of minutes in the front court without if Bam's not in there. We saw Ware kind of get yelled at by Spo, a couple times during that game too, just kind of like hitting kind of a rookie wall, like after a strong start once he made it his way into the lineup. So I don't know, not great. There's gonna be some opportunity there for sure. It's the Hawks, they teams mostly play them pretty tight. So I'd be looking at Slow-Mo Marcus. He should have a pretty high ceiling because they don't want to play Highsmith anymore for some reason.
Yep. Yeah, that rotation has just been very fluid from game to game. Where guys will go from like 25 minutes and starting to like 3 minutes on the fringe of the rotation. So I think we do have at least a decent signal that Kyle Anderson is the clear preferred option to Haywood Highsmith and some of these other guys. Jovic's injury clears things out a little bit. Obviously, in that front court, his 25 to 28 minutes will be sorely missed here. So let's get into the money making portion of the show. For all you guys new, like projections for premium drops on most days at 4:30 Eastern. So those are live now. What we do now is kind of go through our favorite edges, and yeah, let's get into it. SBK.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 today. That's a little bit more than usual. I'm curious to see. It's been a little while since we've looked at these markets. I'm curious to see if they're still hanging around. Looks like so. We'll start with Chris Middleton under 4.5. Or is that 3? Just 3.5 there now. Not as interested in that. I think there was some 4.5s before we came on here. I think the bet online plus 115 on that is not bad. If you can find, it looks like there are no 4.5s. So yeah, I think if you can get better than plus 115 on under 3.5, I think that's worth the look. Just hasn't really been that involved as a passer, which is I think a little surprising. Like given Jordan Poole's not like a distributor, he will never seen a shot he does not like. But even in the last game where we saw Middleton finally kind of corral some assists, he ended up 5. Only had 4 potentials, so he did get a little bit lucky there. The scorekeeping can be a little bit weird with potential assists sometimes. So maybe he got a tad lucky in that regard. Certainly got lucky in terms of his opponents knocking down shots. I don't think his minutes are going to get like stretched out much more. Like I don't think he's going to like start all of a sudden playing like into the 30s. They have young guys who I think they want to develop. He is probably not somebody that they are super interested in extending, especially in games that aren't like super competitive. So really don't mind anything plus 115 or better there. Has moved on us a little though. So we can go to the next one. This is kind of ugly. I think it makes sense given the spot though. We got a Cade Cunningham points. That one is still looking good, fortunately. Although, yeah, pretty much just the under 27.5 I like. It's not, this has come down a little bit as well. The one upside, if you do have concierge access here, we didn't mention this, projections do drop at 4 o'clock Eastern. So those guys can sometimes eat some of these edges up early. I do like that Hard Rock price there. If you can by some chance get that. The flip under 27.5 at minus 125, still think that's okay. But most of these numbers, I think, are right. So big part of this is, the Boston defense, I think, is a tough matchup for Cade. They have a number of guys. Drew Holiday they should have today. Derek White, who they can throw at him, make life difficult. I think the big thing here is like Boston is a smart defensive team. I think they'll make a concerted effort here to take Cade away. If you look at the other guys they have in this offense, it is ugly. It gets very ugly very quick. Tobias Harris, he unfortunately have been a Sixers fan my entire life. Watched way too many Tobias Harris games. Every single time he matches up with Boston, he sucks. I imagine that is going to continue again here, especially if they kind of try to force the ball into his hands a little bit more. Tim Hardaway Jr., not somebody that Boston's going to be afraid of beating them. Jalen Duren, All-Star Thompson has next to no offensive game. So I think Boston obviously realizes that, and I think they will make life on Cade very tough. So I think pretty much any of those numbers are okay. If you can get under 27.5, I think most of those prices that are going to be realistic will be fine. We can move on. Actually, let's kind of stay in this game. Can we go to All-Star over 1.5 steals? I feel like that one will probably kind of still be sitting there, I don't think, around the same price. Well, looks like the FanDuel number has come down a bit. Yeah, that price is also not as good as it was earlier. Still think there is something there. I'd be fine. It's obviously not terribly appealing to lay like minus 235 or whatever that was on DraftKings for him to record a steal. Do think that's all right. I think he's going to end up playing here. They don't have Fontecchio, which removes another kind of option on the wing. They haven't really extended Ron Holland much in the short time that Fontecchio has been out. We saw Tobias play a ton in that last game. Not sure that necessarily continues. But we also did see Elsar get like kind of a small bump So I do think he has a bit higher of a ceiling than normal. I think he should be very involved on the defensive end in terms of trying to slow down what Boston does. So we expect him to be on ball a decent bit, which I think helps. So I think even at this plus 152 on FanDuel, still think that's fine. Wouldn't go too far past that. I think like probably plus 140 is probably about the stopping point. So there's not a ton of room, but I think pretty much any of those prices that were on the screen look pretty appealing. We can go to our one of our favorite guys to bet on, Chris Dunn points. This has kind of come down a little bit as well. We might have came up like a half minute on him. That could be it also. Despite there not really being much of an edge here, like that MGM price, I think is appealing. Chris Dunn just has like zero offensive game. I would say this to Chris Dunn's face. I think I'm a better shooter than he is. I know we had some Detroit bets the other day where we're kind of sweating Chris Dunn making shots. Generally something you want when you have a bet on the other team. But yeah, Dunn just has like zero offensive game. He's a very poor 3-point shooter. He is really not involved in the offense outside of that. They get Kawhi back here, who they haven't had the last few nights. That's obviously the big key here. Still have Harden, still have Zubac, have Kawhi, so the offense will primarily run through those three. Chris Dunn's really only avenue to scoring when they have kind of most of their guys are obviously still missing Norm, which does create a pretty big hole in terms of 3-point shooting. That's really going to be his path primarily, so he's probably going to have to knock at least one of those down in order to get over this mark. But again, just somebody who does not score the ball with any sort of efficiency. He's going to probably have to get lucky on his handful of shot attempts in order to go over this. They just have a lot of options now. Like their bench is getting kind of deep. They have, Derek Jones is like not traditionally starting right now. And Nick Batum started last game. I don't think that's going to continue. He's still off the bench. They have Amir Coffey. They have Bogdan. They have a lot of bodies. So, it's not necessarily somebody that they need, especially if they are behind, which I don't necessarily expect them to be here. But yeah, just Chris Dunn scoring points is generally something I'm willing to bet against. Former team narrative. I don't think so. Chris Dunn wasn't that big a part of Chicago's plans. He did have a cup of coffee there, though.
Yeah, we did come up on the Chris Dunn minutes, which is why this edge dissipated a little bit. I do think we're on the higher end of his range at 27.5. SBK mentioned that they do have some options now with Kawhi back in the lineup. They also will have Ben Simmons as well, who has missed some time recently with the back-to-back. He was out their last game on Monday. So some options there. We ended up cutting a lot of the minutes from some of the front court guys and like Nico Batum, Drew Eubanks, to kind of lean a little bit smaller. That was our projection change to get done up to 27.5 minutes. But I think we are kind of a little on the higher end of his range there.
So Joe Curley said, put some respect on Toby's name. He's been playing well lately. I will not put any respect on Tobias Harris's name. That's not going to happen. We can stick in this same game, though. You mentioned this guy, Ben Simmons. Can we go to turnovers? Kind of an interesting stat for Ben. He has had a nice role here so far in terms of minutes. I think he makes it can make a lot of sense with this group, especially when Zubac's off the floor. That one has kind of moved down a little bit too. Not super exciting there. So I think we can that plus 120. I think is something. I think we might have come down a minute or a half minute on Ben too as a result of coming up on Chris. So that might
yeah.
A little bit. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that I do think Ben does have a floor here, so I think our 22.5 minutes is pretty fair. Mm-hmm. But he will handle the ball, especially when Harden's not on the floor. He'll have it in his hands a decent bit. Generally, when he's played into the mid-20s, he's still going to be – the thing he does is pass. That is generally a very good way to fall into turnovers. So he's going to play into the low to mid-20s. I do think just in terms of a passes made, and the fact he's going to have the ball in his hands a decent amount, he could pick up some offensive foul, things like that. Just think there's enough ways for him to turn the ball over twice. I did actually give the market a tiny bit of credit also, so came down a tiny bit on his turnover rate. We were showing a little bit bigger one over earlier, and I guess the coming down a half minute also kind of trimmed some fat off that. But yeah, do think we're kind of being a little conservative here. I think on the turnover projection, in general. So I do think there is a little bit of interest at that, like the ESPN price, I think, is entering the Hard Rock price. You can, by some chance, get down either of those books. Generally, do not like to take much action. Can we go to KJ Martin? One of my guy I did enjoy watching quite a bit with the Sixers this year. He actually was useful for the first time, I think, in his entire NBA career. Had a nice role here. Now in Utah. Oh, we are pretty much perfectly on market with that. I think did we come up with shade on KJ? I think we might have.
Yeah. Moved around some Utah minutes like kind of recently. I think there's just some volatility there with with the rotation. It's really interested to see the Micah Potter role today, particularly. See how he ends up being used, but came up on him a little bit. And yeah, moved some things around. KJ, I think we had him at like 27 before it came down here. So yeah, yeah, like I said, a lot of volatility.
For sure, yeah. I think though you could look at the 3-point under with KJ. That is the one spot, but like he's also kind of doesn't really serve any kind of a role besides really kind of being somebody that can sort of space the floor. He's a horrific shooter, so it's not really a role that he's good in. He's more of like, he can dunk. He was in a dunk contest before. He's just not a great shooter. I do think the PRA is probably something worth avoiding at this point. The one thing that I think is interesting with Utah is like when they have there's been Svi Mikhailuk has been in the rotation to a degree. He generally is in there when he starts, and when he does not start, he DNPs more often than not. So that's like kind of another place where I think we have some minutes now that could potentially go to KJ or some of these other guys. There's a little bit of like push and pull there, and like you mentioned, Micah Potter too. That role kind of uncertain. Utah has some new bodies in the building now. They have some guys out, so it is kind of a little bit of a tough rotation to project. KJ is another one, kind of like the Chris Dunn bucket, where like he just has no offensive game. So like I'm generally, especially when the market thinks he's going to play a decent amount of minutes, there's some volatility to that. I'm generally fine with like kind of betting against him to produce stats. But yeah, I think kind of there's enough reason to be skeptical and enough upside. If Speed doesn't play or if Potter doesn't play, that this is probably worth avoiding at this point. So I think the one other one we had, Alperen Sengun under 21.5 points. You could also actually, I think the strongest one was probably the under 11.5 rebounds, but I had under 21.5 points, under 11.5 rebounds, and or under 32.5 points and rebounds. So I think you can kind of look at any of those, and we can kind of just see what looks the best. Looks like the market's kind of come up a tiny bit there. This doesn't look quite as interesting as it did earlier. I think the BetMGM price is okay. Can you just go to just rebounds? Yeah, it's like a ton there. There's kind of nothing there on points at this point either. Yeah, not much there. Yeah, and we can that can be an avoid at this point. Generally, when we get kind of through this portion of the show, we do kind of just take questions based on, users have seen projections, whether you're concierge or premium, for at least about 15 minutes now. A lot of people will kind of surf through the page, see what the top edges are. If you have questions on those things and you're in here on a regular basis while we're doing the shows, you can fire in questions. We'll kind of go through some of those. We do have some questions in the chat now that I kind of wanted to touch on. Got a question about Tosan's role on this terrible Nets team. I think it's a great.
Yeah. So they've been in a situation where they've made him an active G League when they've been a little fuller. They've had some options. Now that they are a little shorter on bodies, he's available today. I thought his role would have been obviously a little bit better if Cam Johnson ended up sitting. Cam Johnson would have thought he would have been likely to not play, but he's available. That cuts in Tosan's role a little bit. But we have him at 22 right now, but I think he could definitely, go 23, 24. The place I think we're fragile on this Brooklyn rotation right now is those 6 minutes we have on Maxwell Lewis, who hasn't played, I think, more than like 3 or 4 minutes in a game. So if Maxwell Lewis and they play like similar positions, like 3-4. So if Max Lewis ends up playing like 2 or 3 minutes instead, could see Tosan get ramped up. So I actually think there's like upside for Tosan beyond the 22 we have, Matt, if I had to put a range on it. And we've seen him get up there before. The second to last game, he played 26 minutes back on the 10th. He was on a stretch there where he was playing like 26 plus minutes every game. So we've definitely seen that from him. And like per minute this season, he has been really, really, not really, really, but like decent at least. So he has put up some useful lines. I think 15-5, 14-4, a couple games early February. So I think there's some room for Tosan to exceed the 22 we have, Matt, for sure.
Yeah, I think he'd be in there for garbage time too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tosan Uwoma. I think that is the correct pronunciation of the last name. Yeah, he has gotten like up to almost 30 minutes. I think in a few games when they have had a little bit more depth in the front court. So I think he definitely has a ceiling for sure. And they're going to need him with pretty much just Watford and Chart really being like the main guys they have at that spot now. So he's definitely going to have a role. I think that's a great question. And even just, not necessarily just considering his props, but like the Dayron Sharp, the Trendon Watford stuff. He is a guy that is going to affect them. And I think some people might just sleep on just the fact that he's been inactive for a while since they've been healthy. But he's going to play a pretty big role tonight, I would think. And a question on Capella over 6.5 points. I'm kind of curious to see how this looks. I thought about this a lot in the last game. He did end up exceeding that. I do kind of like that over 6.5 minus 130. I think that is okay. The issue with Capella over the last month, and really just before the trade deadline, was we just didn't know if he was going to play. Like we just did not know if he was going to be active, he was going to be in the rotation at all. When you're betting an over 6.5, and I think we're through the trade deadline, I think that shit is mostly done.
Yeah.
But in that situation, like if Capella isn't, but by some chance they don't want to play him and they get back into that, like he's a DMP, it just voids. You get your money back, you move on. But if do
you think Bam's status could affect?
I was just about to mention that too, because we talked about Bam at the start and how his absence would really benefit Okongwu. It would obviously benefit Capella too. They play the same position. It would benefit Okongwu a little bit more because there's more overlap between their minutes. But then you get Kevin Love or whoever else they're going to throw in at backup center, who is clearly not a great option defensively, right? So I think that's a great call out with a little bit of upside in terms of the matchup being improving if Bam sits out.
Yeah, and even just aside from that, just so he's generally just playing the backup center role. They don't have Larry Nance; he's hurt right now. There's really nobody competing with him for that. So unless Okongwu was going to get up into the mid 30s or something, Capella has a path to normal playing time. I think that over 6.5 looks fine.
Yeah, they don't really have a small ball guy available since Nance is down.
I feel really good about them. Yeah, I feel really good about them chopping 48 today between Okongwu and Capella, barring something unforeseen.
Right. Yeah. Some game being way out of hand or something. Alsar over 1.5 steals and blocks plus 112. I have to imagine that's okay. We don't have the capability to send that, so you don't have to worry about going there. I have to imagine that's fine. I can't see right now where we're at exactly, but I have to imagine that's okay. We're projecting like 2 or close to that at least. If you're getting plus 112, you're doing fine.
Like we talked about earlier, he'll be on ball a lot. Like he's going to be the primary Jason Tatum defender today, and then going to be even more in focus if Jaylen Brown ends up sitting. Then the offense is going to really operate through Tatum, and stopping him will be a big priority.
Yeah,
and great post game comments from Bickerstaff after last game about Asar and how he's been impacting things on the defensive end.
And that is big, against Boston, especially with Fontecchio out. There's another, wing that they don't have there. Especially if Tobias doesn't play 38 minutes again. I think Alsar could potentially step into some of that time. So I think the ceiling for playing time for Alsar is probably as high as it's been lately in a while. Would Dunn, I assume we're talking about Chris, have many fourth quarter minutes in a case of a blowout? Probably not. They just have too many bodies. They have a couple of G League guys out. No Cam Christie, no Jordan Miller, no Trenton Flowers. In addition to regular absences, so they're short a few G League guys, but no, I don't think Dunn would be out there in the game that's out of Peter Gazer, it is good to see you back, my friend. Thoughts on Deuce McBride over 1.5 threes? I knowing Peter, this probably won't. Actually, no, that's okay. I feel like usually Peter likes to throw.
Make sure. So this is the cat out conditional.
Oh, okay.
Projection.
Yeah.
That's still not an edge, but
not much there. Yeah. I
medium
mean,
over, maybe.
Yeah, if it were, I think if the circumstances were the same, but anybody except for Tibbs was the Knicks coach, I'd feel better about betting this right now. But yeah, given that he threw him back in there after the injury, and the fact that like Tibbs will play him, and if they do play him, run him out there for 34, 35, 36 minutes. That could kind of eat into McBride.
Yeah, and also like in a conditional, we're not projecting Deuce for many more minutes. I think we have like 2 extra minutes in the conditional with Cat out. It just doesn't really skew his way. They're gonna go a lot of like Precious Hukporty at center. Like the biggest winner there by far is Precious in terms of minutes. Like he's gonna get a 16-minute bump, so it doesn't leave a ton for like these backcourt wing types to improve.
Yeah, the minutes for McBride, I don't think would really change much. It would be just the fact that they are like without one of their 2 main offensive contributors. So I think a lot more pressure on Jalen Brunson, which I think could lead to more attempts for a guy like McBride. Matas Buzelis under 5.5 rebounds, -120. Curious how that sims out. Yeah, there's question. Oh yeah. That's Io being up in the air is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Well, I think this it is a little surprising because the rebounding output from Matas was a little disappointing. I mean, they've been without Vooch, so Matas has basically served as their backup center behind Zach Collins. He ended up with like 3 rebounds against Philly on Monday. But you would think just like positionally, he would have to rebound more, just given how short they are in that front court.
Yeah, I mean, we saw like Josh Giddey, like people say like they're playing forward guards. Like Josh Giddey's like essentially a power forward. He had a ton of rebounds. Yeah. I think he's obviously seen a very noticeable uptick there. Obviously, Zach Collins is gonna do that while he's out there. So I don't mind the Matas under, but I think there is some danger. He is going to play some minutes at the 5. So I think that's probably is why we're a little bit below market. Is just I think they're probably anticipating a bit more of him, like seeing a more noticeable rebound rate bump with the likely position change. But yeah,
I think Michael, I would probably stay away from this. So there's a couple of things, right? I think him playing technically small ball center is a factor. Io DeSumo is questionable, but he didn't do much at shoot around today outside of getting shots up at the end. Casey Johnson, who's like a legend on that beat, speculated that he wouldn't be surprised if Io ends up sitting. So check those 2 things: Io possibly sitting and Matas playing backup center. And you saw against Philly, even in a blowout, they won that game by 32 points. Matas got all the way up to like 35.5 minutes. So I just think there's a lot more ways for this projection to improve and for that rebound projection to tick up rather than go the other way. So I would probably just hold off on this at least until we get Io news that he is playing, because that would impact the minute ceiling there. And I definitely wouldn't want a piece of this if Matas is showing like a 35, 36 minute path.
Yeah, there's no one behind Zach Collins. Tough matchup against Zoo, and if foul trouble, there's a lot of ways this could go awry really quickly.
Try to hit like 1 or 2 more. I know we want to get through the conditionals before we. Just those leads before we get off. See any interest in Bridges points? I assume I don't think the Hornets are playing today, right? Yeah, it's just the Knicks. I would be interested in Bridges points without Cat for sure. Just again, it's I think a situation where you're going to want to kind of have your finger on the trigger when that news comes, and hope that you can kind of. One thing I did want to know that I think we kind of glossed over a little bit too much early in the show is the quality of the news and how impactful that can be. You noted that sometimes we can have like a 15, 20 second, 30 second gap between us and the other leading competitor. that time is absolutely massive. Like in terms of being able to get down, having 15, 20 seconds, if you're kind of logged into a book on your phone or whatever, and having that time to get down on stuff is unbelievably huge. And I think over the course of the season, especially if you're willing to kind of be around and be able to take advantage of some of those situations, that'll help your ROI in a very noticeable way. Obviously it's not like the best thing for your account health, sure, to like be hitting books on news right before they take stuff down. Obviously not the best for account health, but the goal of sports betting is to win money. And that is generally a great way to get a decent chunk of money down on something that has a lot of, you're likely to get a lot of closing line value on. So just wanted to at least note that wanted to kind of highlight that a little bit more, that the difference between us and the other leading competitor, that time is unbelievably massive. And I think it is unquestionably worth what it costs to get this service just for that. Like even if you want to ignore props, you want to ignore anything else, if you can be around here and take advantage of that time between when we release news and when it is generally responded to by sportsbooks, this service will pay for itself, I think, very quickly. So wanted to highlight that. I think that is an unbelievably underrated part of the service.
Yeah, I think just speaking personally, just manning the feed and getting the news out, I've been able to get the news out, put like bets on like 3 or 4 different props, and get down the side before it's been pulled like multiple times so far this season. So I think that is something that kind of our secret weapon. We just wanted to keep it paywalled just for our members and not do any sort of public Twitter feed. So the only people that are able to kind of benefit that from all that stuff is our subscribers. So I do want to talk about, we can get Taylor. I'll mention this. I'll address this a little bit when we kind of run through the conditionals at the end, but I think it's a good point. We'll kind of talk through it a little bit then. Any other kind of final questions you want to get to, SBK, before we run through the injuries?
No, we have 2 minutes, so we can go ahead with the injuries.
All right, John, you want to drop down the menu, and then we can kind of run through. So Bam Adebayo, we don't really have too much of a strong lean there. He said he wasn't sure if he was going to play after shoot around today. Would think true 50-50, no lean, so we'll do far right for him. Scotty Barnes, I think kind of the same situation, same day ad. We saw him ding up that right side yesterday, but play through it. I don't feel good enough to say will lean him not playing. I think the slightest of leans towards like Bam and Scotty not playing, but nothing strong enough to act on. Jaylen Brown, we're thinking out. Suffered that injury yesterday, was hobbling, and said he had a bone bruise after last night's game. Definitely concerning, secondly, back-to-back. I'd assume the report from Casey Johnson earlier today that he was very limited in what he was able to shoot around and just put up shots afterwards gives me a slight lean towards him not playing. I think we have 45% there, which is accurate. Tyrese Halliburton, we'll go true 50-50 there. Like I said, he had a groin issue earlier this year that caused him to miss his only game of the season. So there's the precedence there for him missing time with a groin issue. Let's go far right 50-50 there, John. Jakob Poeltl, Darko, their coach, said yesterday he's very close to returning. We're leaning him slightly in. Kristaps Porzingis, Joe Mazzulla said that they held him out yesterday with the express goal to have him available today. We are leaning Kristaps in. And then Karl-Anthony Towns, I think we're leaning slightly out just given how bad the injury looked at the time and, how much it makes sense for them to be cautious here and how he's already missed time with knee issues this season. It's a slight lean out, like 45% right now. But for me, I don't think it's strong enough to be firing stuff at the moment. I think this is one where you need to be prepped beforehand and just know, okay, when Cat gets ruled out, I need to fire on this, and that. So that's how we approach the Cat stuff, more so than getting out ahead of it and doing anything at the moment, just because there are some other kind of push-pull factors with Tibbs being an absolute psycho, Tibbs putting him back in the game after it happened, after we all saw how bad it looked. He put him back in, said he was okay, yada, yada, yada. So, wouldn't shock me if he plays just a slight lean, just from like a logical, my human common sense brain tells me that it makes more sense for them to be cautious here. So that wraps it up for us today. Appreciate everyone hanging out with us. We will be in the alpha chats the rest of the way, hanging out with you guys, answering questions, talking about edges, and all that. We will be back doing our show on Friday. Believe that one may be free as well. We are thinking we'll do another one for you guys. But yeah, appreciate you guys hanging with us. All your questions. We're gonna go, get the piss jugs ready and start grinding away on this key news stretch. So see you guys on Friday, and let's have a good day.
You know the crowd is ready. You ready?